On a humid spring morning in May 2015, the life of 34-year-old Audrey Blackwell changed forever. The Detroit nurse was preparing for her morning shift at Henry Ford Hospital when her phone rang. The international number flashing on her screen would deliver news that would alter the course of her existence. Her husband of 5 years, Vikram Mehta, a financial consultant specializing in international investments, had reportedly died in a horrific car accident on the outskirts of Mumbai, India. Mrs. Blackwell, I regret to inform you that your husband's vehicle was involved in a collision with a fuel truck on the Mumbai-Pune Expressway, explained Inspector Rajesh Kumar of the Mumbai Police. The car caught fire immediately after impact. We identified him through his passport and personal effects found at the scene. The details were sparse but devastating. Vikram had traveled to India for what he described as an important business meeting with potential investors. It was his third trip to his homeland that year, something not unusual for the 38-year-old who maintained close ties with his family and business contacts in Mumbai. According to police reports, Vikram's rented car had veered off the expressway during heavy rainfall, colliding with a fuel tanker. The resulting explosion left little to identify. Audrey collapsed in her living room in the North Rosedale Park neighborhood of Detroit, surrounded by photographs of their life together. They had met 6 years earlier at a hospital fundraiser where Vikram, then new to America, had been invited through his employer, a multinational financial firm. Their romance had been swift and passionate. Within a year, they were married in a ceremony that blended American and Indian traditions, promising a future filled with possibilities. He always talked about building bridges between cultures, Audrey later told investigators. That's what drew me to him, his vision of a life that spanned continents. In the days following the accident, Audrey faced the impossible task of navigating grief while dealing with international death protocols. Vikram's father, Deepak Mehta, a prominent businessman in Mumbai, insisted that cremation should happen quickly in accordance with Hindu traditions. Despite her desire to see her husband one last time, Audrey was told that the severity of the burns made viewing inadvisable. Cultural pressure and practical constraints led her to accept the family's decision. A memorial service was held in Mumbai, which Audrey attended in a haze of grief. Deepak Mehta appeared stoic and distant, while his second wife, Lakshmi Mehta, Vikram's stepmother, displayed what seemed like appropriate mourning. The family dynamics were complex. Vikram's mother had died when he was a teenager, and his relationship with his stepmother had always been cordial but reserved, according to what he had shared with Audrey. I remember standing there at the ceremony, feeling completely disconnected, Audrey later recounted. Everyone was speaking Hindi around me. I couldn't understand the rituals. I just wanted to take him home, but there would be no body to take home. Only a small ornate urn containing ashes was given to Audrey to transport back to America. She held it on her lap during the entire 13-hour flight from Mumbai to Detroit, a surreal journey that marked the beginning of her life as a widow. In the months that followed, Audrey retreated into grief. Friends reported that she took a leave of absence from the hospital and rarely left her home. The financial aftermath of death compounded her emotional trauma. As Vikram's beneficiary, Audrey received a life insurance payout of $5 million, a sum that surprised her. She hadn't been aware that he had increased his coverage just 6 months before his death. It felt like blood money, she told her closest friend, Melissa Thornton. But Vikram always said he wanted to make sure I was taken care of if anything happened to him. There were other financial matters to settle. Vikram had maintained separate accounts for his international business dealings, which proved challenging to access. His father, acting through the family's attorney, helped facilitate the transfer of assets, a process that took nearly a year to complete. By the time it was finalized, Audrey had inherited not only the insurance money, but also approximately $800,000 in various investments and savings. Records obtained later by investigators showed unusual patterns in Vikram's financial activities in the months preceding his death. Large sums had been transferred between various accounts, with significant withdrawals made during his trips to India. When questioned about these transactions years later, Audrey admitted she had been largely unaware of the details of her husband's financial affairs. He handled all of that, she explained. In our marriage, I focused on my career in nursing, and he managed our finances. It was a division of labor that worked for us. The Detroit Police Department conducted a standard review of the death, as is protocol for citizens who die abroad. but with confirmation from Indian authorities and no suspicious circumstances reported, the case was quickly closed. The death certificate, issued by Mumbai authorities, listed the cause as accidental death due to vehicular collision and subsequent fire. Life insurance investigators performed their own review before releasing the payment. They verified the police reports, death certificate, and cremation records from India. Everything appeared in order. The case file was closed, and Audrey Blackwell was officially classified as a widow at 34 years old. For the next 3 years, Audrey lived in a state of suspended animation. She eventually returned to work, finding solace in the structured environment of the hospital and in caring for others. Friends noted that she rarely spoke of Vikram, keeping photographs of him confined to her bedroom rather than displayed throughout the house as they once had been. In 2018, nearly 3 years after Vikram's death, Audrey made a significant change. Using a portion of her inheritance, she sold their home in Detroit and purchased a smaller condominium in the city's riverfront district. The move represented her first real step toward building a new life without Vikram. "I couldn't stay in that house anymore," she told Melissa. "Every corner held a memory. I needed space that was just mine, not ours." That same year, Audrey established a small scholarship fund at Wayne State University for nursing students, naming it after Vikram. The annual award of $10,000 was her way of creating something meaningful from her loss. The foundation work gave her purpose, and gradually she began to emerge from the darkest periods of her grief. By 2020, 5 years after Vikram's death, Audrey had developed a new routine. She had been promoted to nursing supervisor at Henry Ford Hospital, a role that came with greater responsibilities and a welcome distraction from her personal life. She had made tentative steps toward dating again, though friends reported that these relationships were brief and never serious. She would always find some reason to end things after a few weeks, Melissa later told investigators. It was like she had a barrier up that no one could get past. What no one knew then was that Audrey occasionally experienced moments of doubt about Vikram's death. There had been no body, no final goodbye. Sometimes in the liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, she would imagine that it had all been a mistake, that he would return to her. These thoughts she shared with no one, dismissing them as the natural fantasy of a grieving widow. In the spring of 2023, Audrey's professional life took another turn when she was offered an opportunity to participate in a national nursing leadership conference in Chicago. The 3-day event in September would bring together medical professionals from across the country to discuss innovations in patient care. For Audrey, it represented not only professional advancement, but also a rare chance to step away from the routines that had defined her existence since Vikram's death. She arrived in Chicago on a crisp September evening, checking into the Palmer House Hilton in the heart of the city. The conference schedule was demanding, with sessions beginning early the next morning. After settling into her room, she decided to find dinner nearby. A quick search on her phone suggested several options, including a highly rated Indian restaurant called Sapphire just a few blocks away. Audrey hesitated at the suggestion. She had avoided Indian cuisine since Vikram's death, finding the familiar aromas and flavors too evocative of their shared past. But that evening, something prompted her to make a different choice. "I think I was finally ready to reconnect with that part of my life," she later explained. "It had been 8 years. I thought maybe I could enjoy the food again without it being painful." She walked the short distance to the restaurant, which was nestled between a bookstore and a boutique on a busy street in the Loop. The restaurant was moderately crowded for a Wednesday evening, with soft classical Indian music playing in the background. Audrey requested a table for one and was seated in a corner with a view of most of the dining room. She ordered a glass of wine and began reviewing the menu, finding comfort in the familiar names of dishes she and Vikram had once shared. It was while waiting for her food to arrive that Audrey's attention was drawn to a couple being seated at a table across the restaurant. The man had his back to her initially, but something about his posture and the way he moved his hands while speaking struck her as hauntingly familiar. When he turned slightly to address the server, Audrey caught a glimpse of his profile. The wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the table. Across the restaurant, dining with an elegantly dressed older Indian woman, was a man who looked exactly like her dead husband, Vikram Mehta. The impossibility of the moment froze Audrey in place. The server rushed over with a towel, concerned about the broken glass, but Audrey barely registered the commotion. Her eyes remained fixed on the man across the room, cataloguing details with the precision that her medical training had instilled in her. The distinctive mole near his right ear, the slight asymmetry of his smile, the habit of adjusting his cuffs while speaking. As the woman accompanying him leaned forward, the light caught her face, and Audrey recognized her as well. Lakshmi Mehta, Vikram's stepmother, the same woman who had stood beside her at the memorial service in Mumbai 8 years earlier, accepting condolences for the loss of her stepson. In that moment, as Audrey's world tilted on its axis, she made a critical decision that would set in motion a chain of events leading to one of the most unusual fraud investigations in recent history. Instead of confronting the couple immediately, she pulled out her phone and discreetly captured several photographs, her hands trembling so severely that most of the images came out blurred, but a few were clear enough. When the man, the ghost of her husband, looked in her direction, Audrey quickly lowered her gaze. But something in her demeanor must have alerted him. Minutes later, when she dared to look up again, she saw him speaking urgently to his companion. The woman glanced in Audrey's direction, her expression changing from confusion to alarm. Within moments, they had signaled for their check, leaving their meals barely touched. Audrey watched as they hurried toward the exit, the man keeping his face averted. As they passed near her table, she heard his voice, a voice she had never expected to hear again, muttering rapidly in Hindi to the older woman. There was no mistaking it. The cadence, the timbre, the slight accent when speaking his native language. It was Vikram. By the time Audrey recovered from her shock enough to move, the couple had disappeared into the Chicago night. She threw cash on the table and rushed outside, but the crowded sidewalk revealed no sign of them. They were gone. Back in her hotel room, Audrey sat on the edge of the bed staring at the photographs on her phone. The images were imperfect, captured in haste under dim restaurant lighting, but there was no doubt in her mind. The man in the photos was Vikram Mehta, her husband, who had supposedly died in a fiery crash on a rain-slicked highway in India 8 years earlier. That night, Audrey made no appearance at the conference welcome reception. Instead, she spent hours searching online, looking for any trace of Vikram or his stepmother in Chicago. She found nothing. As dawn broke over Lake Michigan, she had made her decision. The nursing conference would continue without her. She had a more urgent mission now, to understand how and why her dead husband was walking the streets of Chicago with the woman who had helped bury him. What Audrey Blackwell couldn't know as she booked an extended stay at the hotel and cancelled her return flight to Detroit was that she had just taken the first step in unraveling an elaborate international fraud that stretched across continents and involved millions of dollars. The man she had loved, mourned, and ultimately tried to move beyond had orchestrated one of the most personal betrayals imaginable. And as the sun rose on that September morning, the ghost of Vikram Mehta had no idea that his carefully constructed second life was about to collapse around him. The morning after her shocking discovery at Sapphire Restaurant, Audrey Blackwell sat in her hotel room, surrounded by hastily scribbled notes and printouts from her laptop. Sleep had eluded her entirely. The conference she had traveled to Chicago for was now the furthest thing from her mind as she methodically pieced together what little information she had. The photographs she had taken, though blurry, provided undeniable evidence. She had enhanced them as best she could using her phone's basic editing tools. In one image, the man's profile was clearly visible as he turned to speak to the server. The distinctive jawline, the slight bump on the bridge of his nose from a childhood injury, details so intimately familiar to her, they might as well have been carved into her memory. "This can't be happening," she whispered to the empty room. But the evidence before her suggested otherwise. Audrey's training as a nurse had taught her to approach problems systematically, to gather information before drawing conclusions. She applied that same methodology now, creating a timeline of events starting with Vikram's supposed death in 2015. She noted inconsistencies she had never questioned before. The family's insistence on immediate cremation, the difficulty in accessing certain financial accounts, the increased life insurance policy. At 9:15 a.m., she made her first concrete move. Rather than contacting the police, what would she tell them? That she saw her dead husband having dinner? She called Parker Reed, a private investigator whose services she had used during the settlement of Vikram's estate to locate some missing financial documents. "I need your help with something unusual," she told him, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "How quickly can you get to Chicago?" Reed, a former Detroit police detective with 20 years of experience before opening his private practice, arrived at her hotel by early evening. His weathered face revealed nothing as Audrey explained the situation and showed him the photographs. In my line of work, Mrs. Blackwell, I've learned that dead men sometimes have a way of not staying dead, he said after examining the evidence. But this is a first even for me. A man faking his own death isn't unheard of, but maintaining the deception for 8 years, that takes resources and planning. Reed's first step was to establish surveillance at Sapphire Restaurant. If Vikram and Lakshmi had dined there once, they might return. Meanwhile, he began the process of identifying Raj Sharma, the name Audrey had overheard during their hasty exit. If he's living under an assumed identity, he's left tracks somewhere, Reed assured her. False identities require documentation. Social security numbers, driver's licenses, credit histories, these things leave paper trails. For the next 3 days, Audrey remained in her hotel room while Reed worked his contacts and conducted preliminary surveillance. The conference she had traveled for concluded without her attendance. She called the hospital in Detroit, claiming a family emergency required her extended stay in Chicago. On the 4th day, Reed arrived with his first substantial lead. He's not in Chicago, the investigator reported, spreading photographs across the hotel desk. At least, not anymore. After leaving the restaurant, they took a red-eye flight to Cleveland that same night. The surveillance photos showed the couple at O'Hare International Airport, moving hurriedly through the terminal. Reed had obtained the information through contacts at the TSA, though he was careful not to explain exactly how he'd managed it. They traveled under the names Raj and Lakshmi Sharma. They have a residence in Shaker Heights, an affluent suburb of Cleveland. He's been living there for approximately 6 years, working as a financial consultant for a firm called Meridian Investments. Audrey stared at the new photographs. There was no doubt now, the man was Vikram, though his appearance had changed subtly. His formerly clean-shaven face now sported a neatly trimmed beard. His hair was styled differently, and he wore glasses she had never seen before. But it was him. 6 years, she repeated, her voice hollow. So for the first 2 years after his death, he was. Where? That's what we need to find out, Reed replied. I've got a colleague in Cleveland who can begin surveillance on the Shaker Heights address. Meanwhile, I suggest we relocate. If they spotted you in Chicago, they know you've seen them. They'll be watching for you. Within hours, Audrey had checked out of the Palmer House and moved to a smaller hotel under a different name, using cash for payment. Reed advised her to purchase a prepaid phone and to avoid using credit cards or social media until they better understood what they were dealing with. The Cleveland surveillance began immediately. Reed's associate, a former FBI agent named Diana Mercer, positioned herself near the Sharma residence, a substantial Tudor-style home in one of Shaker Heights' most exclusive neighborhoods. Property records show they purchased the house 5 years ago for $2 million, Mercer reported during their first conference call. Cash transaction, no mortgage. The money came from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Over the next week, a picture of Raj Sharma's life began to emerge. He left the house each morning at precisely 7:45 a.m., driving a late-model Audi to the offices of Meridian Investments in downtown Cleveland. Lakshmi maintained a more irregular schedule, frequently visiting local shops, a yoga studio, and the Hindu temple in suburban Palmer. They appear well established in the community, Mercer noted. They attend social functions, have regular dinner engagements. For all intents and purposes, they're living the life of a successful professional and his mother. Stepmother, Audrey corrected automatically, the distinction suddenly important to her. Reed's investigation into Meridian Investments revealed that Raj Sharma had joined the firm 5 years earlier, bringing with him a significant portfolio of international clients, primarily from India and the United Arab Emirates. His expertise was listed as cross-border investments and tax strategies for high-net-worth individuals. He's using his actual expertise, Audrey realized. That was always Vikram's specialty at his firm in Detroit. The most disturbing discovery came when Reed obtained copies of Raj Sharma's identification documents through contacts at the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles. The birth date listed was January 15, 1977, exactly 3 years earlier than Vikram's actual birth date, but with the same month and day. A common tactic, Reed explained. Keep elements of your true identity when creating a false one. It makes the lie easier to maintain because you don't have to remember as many fictitious details. As the investigation deepened, Reed uncovered a pattern of travel between Cleveland and Mumbai. Over the past 5 years, Raj Sharma had made 2 trips annually to India, each lasting approximately 3 weeks. The most recent had been just 4 months earlier. He's maintaining connections there, Reed hypothesized. The question is, with whom? If his father, Deepak Mehta, was part of this deception, is he still alive? The answer came through Mercer's surveillance. She had followed Lakshmi to a local FedEx office where the woman mailed a package to an address in Mumbai. The recipient, Deepak Mehta. So the father's alive too, Audrey said, her voice tight with anger when she received this news. The entire family conspired in this. Not necessarily, Reed cautioned. It's possible Lakshmi is maintaining contact without his knowledge of the fraud. We need more information before drawing conclusions. 2 weeks into the investigation, they had their most significant breakthrough. Mercer had placed a tracking device on Raj's vehicle, following his movements throughout Cleveland. One evening, instead of returning directly home, he drove to a storage facility on the outskirts of the city. Mercer observed him entering a climate-controlled unit, remaining inside for approximately 40 minutes before leaving with a small lockbox. Reed immediately sought a warrant to access the storage unit, leveraging his law enforcement contacts and the preliminary evidence of identity fraud. What they found inside would blow the case wide open. The unit contained dozens of bankers' boxes filled with financial records, multiple passports in different names, but all with Vikram's photograph, and detailed documentation of bank accounts in various offshore locations. Most damning of all was a folder containing newspaper clippings about the fatal car accident in Mumbai, along with copies of the insurance claim filed in the United States. "This is it," Reed told Audrey during their nightly update call. "This is proof of premeditated fraud. The accident wasn't opportunistic, it was planned." As Audrey processed this information, sitting alone in her anonymous hotel room, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Vikram's father, Deepak Mehta, had reportedly been in poor health before his son's death. In fact, Vikram had cited his father's declining condition as the reason for his increased travel to India in the months preceding the accident. What if Deepak was the one who actually died? She proposed to Reed. What if they used his death somehow in this scheme? Reed promised to investigate this angle, but before he could begin, Mercer called with urgent news. Raj and Lakshmi are packing large suitcases. They appear to be preparing for extended travel. The surveillance photos showed the couple moving hurriedly around their home, loading luggage into their car late at night. Something had spooked them. Perhaps Mercer's surveillance had been detected, or maybe they had other sources of information warning them of the investigation. "We need to move now," Reed advised Audrey. "If they leave the country, we may never find them again." The decision that Audrey Blackwell made in that moment would transform her from victim to active participant in bringing the fraudsters to justice. After 8 years of mourning a man who had betrayed her in the most fundamental way possible, she was finally ready to confront the ghost who had haunted her life. "Call the FBI," she told Reed, her voice unwavering. "It's time to end this." What neither Audrey nor her investigators could know was that Raj Sharma had indeed been alerted to their presence, not by detecting Mercer's surveillance, but through a banking contact who had flagged unusual inquiries into his financial history. As the net tightened around him, Vikram Mehta was preparing his final disappearing act, unaware that his first victim was now directly on his trail with federal authorities closing in behind her. The Cleveland office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation occupies several floors of a nondescript office building downtown. It was here in a windowless conference room on the 7th floor that Audrey Blackwell found herself on a Thursday morning in late September, surrounded by agents from multiple divisions: financial crimes, identity theft, and international operations. Special Agent Dominic Carrera, a 20-year veteran of complex fraud investigations, led the briefing. "What we're looking at here is potentially one of the most elaborate life insurance frauds I've encountered," he explained, pinning photographs and documents to a large corkboard. "Not just because of the duration. 8 years is unusually long for the perpetrator to maintain the deception, but because of the international components." Audrey sat silently as the agents discussed jurisdictional issues and investigative approaches. The Bureau had moved with surprising speed after Reed had presented them with the evidence from the storage unit. Within hours, agents had obtained emergency warrants to freeze all accounts associated with Raj Sharma and to monitor his communications. "Our primary concern right now is flight risk," Carrera continued, "based on Ms. Mercer's surveillance. The subjects appear to be preparing to leave the country. We've placed alerts at all airports and border crossings, but we have to assume they have contingency plans and possibly additional false documentation not yet identified. What the FBI didn't know, couldn't know, was exactly how elaborate those contingency plans were. As the agents assembled their case in Cleveland, Vikram and Lakshmi were already implementing their escape strategy, one that had been meticulously prepared years in advance. The Sharma residence in Shaker Heights had emptied just after midnight. Neighbors might have noticed the couple loading luggage into their Audi, but in the affluent neighborhood where privacy was valued, no one would have thought it unusual enough to report. Instead of heading to an airport, however, they drove to an unremarkable storage facility in Akron, Ohio. There they abandoned the Audi and transferred to a 10-year-old Honda Civic, registered to yet another identity, Gabriel Reyes, a name and documentation package Vikram had purchased years earlier as his emergency exit strategy. The Civic, deliberately nondescript and unmemorable, headed north toward Detroit, a calculated risk, returning to the city where Vikram had once lived with Audrey, but also the closest major border crossing into Canada. Meanwhile, the FBI had deployed teams to Cleveland Hopkins International Airport and to the Sharma's residence, finding both locations deserted. The digital trail, however, provided crucial information. Agents analyzing Raj Sharma's computer discovered recently deleted searches for flights from Toronto to Mumbai with connections through Dubai. They're headed for Canada, Agent Carrera concluded, immediately redirecting resources to border crossings in Michigan, New York, and Vermont. For Audrey, sitting in that conference room surrounded by federal agents, the reality of her situation was still difficult to process. The man she had loved, mourned, and eventually tried to move beyond had orchestrated an elaborate betrayal that spanned continents. The life insurance payout, which had seemed like cold comfort after his death, was revealed now as the primary motivation for his disappearance. "We've been analyzing the financial records recovered from the storage unit," explained Agent Jenna Walsh from the Financial Crimes Division. "The pattern suggests this wasn't a spontaneous decision. Vikram Mehta began moving assets offshore approximately 18 months before his staged death. The total amount diverted exceeds $3 million, not including the life insurance payout." "Where did that money come from?" Audrey asked, finding her voice for the first time during the briefing. "We lived well, but not extravagantly. I had no idea he had access to that kind of money." The answer came from the international operations agent, Miguel Santos, who had been liaising with authorities in India. "We believe a significant portion came from his father's business in Mumbai. Deepak Mehta ran a successful textile export company that was apparently being used to launder money for various criminal enterprises. When Indian authorities began investigating the company in 2014, it created an urgent need to move assets out of the country. This revelation added another layer to the deception. Not only had Vikram faked his death to claim insurance money, but he had also used the scheme to protect illicit funds from his family's business in India. The accident that had supposedly claimed his life had served multiple purposes, all centered around financial gain. "What about Deepak Mehta?" Audrey asked. "Is he actually alive?" Agent Santos shook his head. According to Indian authorities, Deepak Mehta did indeed die in 2013, approximately 2 years before Vikram's staged accident. However, his death was kept quiet within the company. Employees were told he was receiving medical treatment abroad. Meanwhile, Lakshmi and Vikram continued running the business, gradually transferring assets to offshore accounts. The picture that emerged was one of staggering premeditation. Following Deepak's death, Vikram and his stepmother had orchestrated a complex financial extraction, moving millions through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. The life insurance policy on Vikram, increased just months before his death, was merely one component of a much larger scheme. "What we still don't know," Agent Carrera noted, "is whose body was actually in the car that burned in Mumbai. Someone died in that accident, and that person's identity was obscured by the use of Vikram's personal effects and identification." This question haunted Audrey more than any other aspect of the case. The thought that someone had died, had been sacrificed to facilitate Vikram's deception was horrifying. It transformed the fraud from a financial crime to something far more sinister. As the briefing continued, Agent Walsh presented evidence of Vikram's parallel life as Raj Sharma. He established his new identity methodically, building it layer by layer. First, a basic identification package, birth certificate, social security number, driver's license, all high-quality forgeries obtained through black market channels. Then he built a credit history, rented an apartment, secured employment, each step designed to create the appearance of a real person with a consistent past. The most sophisticated aspect, she continued, was his professional reinvention. He didn't attempt to change careers, which would have required new credentials and education history that might not withstand scrutiny. Instead, he leveraged his actual expertise in international finance, but claimed to have gained that experience through work in Singapore and Dubai, locations where verification would be difficult for American employers. Throughout this detailed deconstruction of Vikram's deception, Audrey remained outwardly composed. Inside, however, she was processing wave after wave of betrayal. Every memory, every shared moment with her husband now required re-examination. Had any of it been real? Had he ever truly loved her? Or had she simply been a convenient American wife, providing him with stability and legitimacy while he prepared his exit strategy? The FBI briefing was interrupted by an urgent call. Border Patrol agents at the Ambassador Bridge, connecting Detroit to Windsor, Canada, had flagged a vehicle matching the description of the Honda Civic. The occupants, a man and an older woman, had presented Canadian passports in the names of Gabriel and Sophia Reyes, claiming to be visiting relatives in Toronto. "They're at the border crossing now," Agent Carrera announced. "Customs and Border Protection is stalling them with additional screening while we coordinate." The room erupted into activity. Within minutes, a tactical plan was formed. FBI agents in Detroit would coordinate with Border Patrol to detain the suspects before they could cross into Canada. Given that they were attempting to use fraudulent documentation to cross an international border, authorities had clear grounds for arrest. "Miss Blackwell," Agent Carrera addressed Audrey directly, "we need you to identify him positively. There's a bureau jet ready at the airport. We can have you in Detroit within the hour." The request momentarily startled Audrey. After 8 years of believing her husband was dead, after 2 weeks of investigating his fraudulent existence as Raj Sharma, she was now being asked to confront him directly. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and vindicating. "I'll do it," she said simply. As Audrey was escorted to the waiting vehicle, Agent Walsh fell into step beside her. "You should prepare yourself," the agent advised quietly. "In cases like this, the perpetrators often maintain their false identities even after being caught. He may deny knowing you, he may claim mistaken identity. It can be emotionally challenging." Audrey nodded, appreciating the warning but doubting anything could prepare her for what lay ahead. The man she had once pledged to love until death had betrayed that vow in the most literal way possible. Now, as the FBI jet carried her back to Detroit, the city where they had built a life together, she steeled herself for a reunion 8 years in the making. At the Ambassador Bridge border crossing, a tense standoff was unfolding. The Honda Civic had been directed to a secondary inspection area, where Gabriel and Sophia Reyes were being questioned separately by Border Patrol agents. The man remained calm, maintaining his story about visiting family in Toronto, showing no outward signs of concern over the extended screening. What he couldn't know was that the net had already closed around him. FBI agents were positioned throughout the facility, waiting only for positive identification before making their move. Inside the main border control building, a makeshift command center tracked every movement, every communication. And at Detroit Metropolitan Airport, a black SUV with federal plates was speeding toward the bridge, carrying Audrey Blackwell toward a confrontation with the ghost of her husband, a ghost who had walked away from their life together, staged his own death, and built an entirely new existence without a backward glance. The final moments of Vikram Mehta's freedom were ticking away, and he didn't even know it. The Ambassador Bridge stretches across the Detroit River, connecting the United States to Canada in a graceful arc of steel and concrete. On busy days, thousands of vehicles cross this international boundary, most passing through with routine efficiency. But on this particular September afternoon, all attention at the border facility focused on the secondary inspection area where a Honda Civic with Ohio plates had been detained for over an hour. Inside the main control building, Audrey Blackwell arrived, escorted by Agent Carrera and 2 additional FBI agents. Her heart hammered against her ribs as they led her to a small observation room with a one-way mirror overlooking the interview space where the man calling himself Gabriel Reyes sat alone at a metal table. Despite preparing herself mentally during the flight, Audrey's breath caught in her throat at the sight of him. 8 years had changed him in subtle ways. Threads of grey at his temples, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, but the fundamental essence of Vikram remained unmistakable to her. The way he held his shoulders, the precise manner in which he folded his hands on the table, the slight tilt of his head as he listened to questions. These were intimate details known only to someone who had shared a life with him. "It's him," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil within. "That's Vikram Mehta." Agent Carrera nodded, making a note on his clipboard. "You're certain? You'd testify to this identification in court?" "Without a doubt," Audrey replied. "I was married to him for 5 years. I'd know him anywhere." The formal identification complete, the FBI moved quickly. Agents entered the interview room, informing the surprised suspect that he was under arrest for multiple federal offenses, including insurance fraud, identity theft, mail fraud, and making false statements to federal officers. Simultaneously, in an adjacent room, Lakshmi Mehta was placed under arrest as an accomplice. Vikram, for even in his Gabriel Reyes identity, he remained Vikram in the eyes of the law, showed no visible reaction to the charges. His expression remained impassive, his posture relaxed as though he had long ago prepared himself for this possibility. Only when Agent Carrera mentioned Audrey's name did a flicker of emotion cross his face. "Your wife has identified you," the agent stated. "Audrey Blackwell positively confirmed that you are Vikram Mehta, the same Vikram Mehta who was reported dead in a car accident in India in 2015. For a moment, Vikram said nothing. Then, with clinical detachment, he requested an attorney and refused to answer further questions. Audrey watched this exchange through the one-way glass, a storm of emotions churning within her. Part of her had expected, perhaps even hoped for, some acknowledgement, some sign that the man she had loved still existed somewhere inside the criminal who had orchestrated this elaborate fraud. But Vikram offered nothing, not even a glance in the direction of the observation window where he might have suspected she was watching. "What happens now?" she asked as agents led Vikram from the interview room in handcuffs. "We transport them to the Federal Detention Center in Detroit," Agent Carrera explained. "They'll have their initial appearance before a magistrate judge tomorrow. Given the flight risk and the serious nature of the charges, I expect they'll be held without bail pending trial." The formal processing of the suspects took place at the border facility before transport. Fingerprints confirmed what Audrey already knew. The man in custody was indeed Vikram Mehta, despite the various identities he had assumed. His prints, taken during his immigration process years earlier, remained in federal databases. As the agents prepared to transfer the suspects, Agent Walsh approached Audrey with an unexpected question. "Would you like to speak with him?" The offer caught Audrey off guard. "Is that allowed?" "It's unorthodox," Walsh admitted, "but given the circumstances, we can arrange a brief meeting. It might actually benefit our case if he makes any admissions to you. Of course, he's requested an attorney, so he may refuse to speak." After a moment's consideration, Audrey declined. "There's nothing I need to say to him today. I've spent 8 years talking to his ghost. The real conversation can wait until he's facing consequences for what he did." This decision was not made from fear, but from a position of strength. Audrey had been caught unprepared in Chicago, shocked by the impossible sight of her dead husband dining with his stepmother. Now she wanted any confrontation to occur on her terms, when she had fully processed the magnitude of his betrayal. As the FBI vehicles departed the border crossing, transporting Vikram and Lakshmi to the Federal Detention Center, Audrey found herself standing alone at the observation window, looking out at the now empty interview room. The space where Vikram had sat seemed to hold the echo of his presence, a physical reminder that the man she had mourned had never actually died. "Ms. Blackwell," Agent Carrera had returned, his expression sympathetic but professional. "We have a team executing search warrants at the Shaker Heights residence and at Raj Sharma's office. Would you like to return to Cleveland with us? Your insight might be valuable as we process the evidence." The request gave Audrey purpose, a concrete way to contribute to the investigation rather than remaining a passive victim. She nodded, gathering her composure. "Yes, I want to help however I can." The flight back to Cleveland passed in contemplative silence. While the agents communicated with the search teams, Audrey stared out the window at the landscape below, trying to reconcile the events of the past 2 weeks with the 8 years of grief that had preceded them. By the time they landed, the FBI had already made significant discoveries at the Shaker Heights home. Hidden in a concealed safe behind a bookshelf in Vikram's study, agents found multiple passports in different names, all bearing his photograph. More damning were detailed financial records documenting the transfer of funds from India to various offshore accounts, and finally to the accounts established under the Raj Sharma identity. "It's a complete paper trail," Agent Walsh explained, as she guided Audrey through the evidence laid out in the living room of the Tudor-style house. "He documented everything meticulously, probably as insurance against Lakshmi trying to cut him out of the scheme. The most disturbing discovery came when agents found a locked cabinet in the basement containing medical records from a private hospital in Mumbai. The documents detailed treatment for a homeless man who had been admitted with severe burns in May 2015, the same month as Vikram's supposed accident. The patient died from his injuries, Agent Walsh explained grimly. The records indicate he was unidentified at admission, no name, no family contacts. Just a John Doe who happened to be approximately the same height and build as Vikram. The implication was clear and horrifying. The body in the burned car had belonged to an anonymous victim, someone whose death could be exploited as part of the scheme. Vikram's identification and personal effects had been planted at the scene to ensure the body would be identified as his. This wasn't just fraud, Audrey whispered, staring at the medical records. This was something much worse. Potentially, Agent Carrera agreed cautiously, though proving that Vikram or Lakshmi had any direct involvement in the victim's injuries would be challenging. The records don't indicate cause of injury, only treatment of severe burns. It's possible they simply took advantage of an existing tragedy. But Audrey, remembering the precise timing of Vikram's increased life insurance and the careful financial preparations preceding his death, found this coincidence difficult to accept. The thought that her husband might have been involved in something approaching murder was almost more than she could bear. As agents continued processing the house, Audrey was drawn to the master bedroom, the private space where Raj and Lakshmi Sharma had lived their parallel lives. The room was elegantly appointed with expensive furnishings and artwork, evidence of the luxurious lifestyle funded by their fraud. On the dresser sat several framed photographs showing Vikram as Raj at various social functions in Cleveland. In one, he stood beside a distinguished-looking Indian man at what appeared to be a cultural event. In another, he posed with a group of business associates outside the offices of Meridian Investments. These images of Vikram's new life struck Audrey more powerfully than any of the evidence of fraud. While she had struggled through grief, gradually rebuilding her life one painful day at a time, he had been attending galas and business meetings, smiling for photographs, building a whole new existence without a backward glance. "Miss Blackwell," Agent Walsh appeared in the doorway. "We've found something you should see." In Vikram's home office, agents had discovered a hidden compartment in the desk containing a small leather-bound book. Unlike the meticulously organized financial records, this appeared to be a personal journal, written in a combination of English and Hindi. "Our translator is working on the Hindi portions," Walsh explained, "but the English entries are significant." She handed Audrey the journal, opened to a page dated approximately 6 months after Vikram's staged death. The entry was brief, but revelatory. "Lakshmi called today with news from Detroit. Hay has established the scholarship fund in my name. Ironic that my legacy will be funding the education of strangers, while my actual future is secured through its absence. Sometimes I almost regret the necessity of it all. But what choice did I have when the authorities were closing in on father's activities? Better to be a beloved dead husband than a disgraced living one." Audrey stared at the words, written in the familiar handwriting she had once found on love notes and birthday cards. The casual dismissal of her grief as ironic, the cold calculation evident in his reasoning, these cut deeper than any other discovery. "He was monitoring me," she realized aloud. "All these years he's been keeping track of my life." Agent Walsh nodded solemnly. "The journal contains multiple references to your activities in Detroit. It appears Lakshmi had contacts there who provided regular updates. This invasion of privacy, the thought that unknown observers had been reporting on her movements while she grieved, added a new dimension to Vikram's betrayal. Her mourning had been a performance unwittingly staged for his benefit, her pain a source of information to ensure his deception remained secure. As the day progressed, the FBI's search of the property yielded additional evidence, strengthening the case against both suspects. Financial records revealed that Lakshmi had received regular payments from the textile business in Mumbai, ostensibly as the widow of Deepak Mehta, but had channeled much of this money to accounts controlled by Vikram under his various identities. "It appears the original plan may have involved Deepak Mehta's actual death," Agent Carrera theorized, as the team compiled their findings. "When he died naturally in 2013, Lakshmi and Vikram used the opportunity to begin extracting assets from the company while maintaining the fiction that Deepak was still alive but receiving medical treatment abroad. This deception had bought them time to transfer funds internationally before Indian authorities could freeze the company's assets as part of their money laundering investigation. Vikram's subsequent death had served as the second phase of the plan, allowing him to escape scrutiny in both India and the United States while claiming the substantial life insurance payout. By evening, the search teams had filled dozens of evidence boxes with documents, electronic devices, and other items from the Sharma residence. Audrey, exhausted both physically and emotionally, sat in the kitchen while agents finished their work. The house that had been Vikram's home for the past 5 years felt surreal to her, a stage set for a life that should never have existed. As she prepared to leave, Agent Walsh approached with a small box containing items the FBI had determined were personal effects, not relevant to the case. Among them was a photograph that had been hidden in Vikram's nightstand drawer, tucked behind other papers. It was a picture of Audrey taken during their honeymoon in Hawaii. She stood on a beach at sunset, unaware of the camera looking out at the ocean. Vikram had kept this single reminder of their life together, hidden away in his new existence as Raj Sharma. Audrey stared at the image, trying to decipher its meaning. Was it sentiment that had led him to keep this memento, or something darker, a trophy from a successful con? The Vikram she thought she had known would have kept it out of love, but that Vikram, she now understood, had never truly existed. She placed the photograph back in the box and handed it to Agent Walsh. "I don't want this," she said quietly. "It belongs in evidence with everything else." As the FBI vehicles departed the Shaker Heights residence, Audrey looked back at the house one last time. Inside those walls, Vikram Mehta had lived his second life as Raj Sharma, while she had struggled through the aftermath of his first. Now both those lives had collapsed, and whatever existence awaited him would unfold behind prison walls. The investigation had only just begun, but already it had revealed a conspiracy far more complex and disturbing than a simple insurance fraud. As the full extent of Vikram and Lakshmi's deception came to light, the case would draw international attention, highlighting vulnerabilities in systems designed to prevent exactly this kind of elaborate fraud. For Audrey Blackwell, however, the most important revelation had nothing to do with financial schemes or false identities. It was the understanding that the man she had loved, the man whose loss had nearly destroyed her, had been a fiction from the beginning. The real Vikram Mehta was the calculating individual who had documented her grief in his journal, who had orchestrated a deception spanning continents and years, who had potentially been involved in the death of an innocent person to facilitate his escape. This knowledge, painful as it was, finally freed her from the ghost that had haunted her for 8 years. As the FBI vehicle carried her away from Vikram's false life, Audrey felt something unexpected beneath the hurt and anger. Relief. The long shadow of grief was lifting, replaced by a determination to see justice done, not just for herself but for all the others affected by the elaborate conspiracy that had now, at last, been exposed. The federal courthouse in downtown Detroit stands as a monument to justice, a massive limestone structure with imposing columns and broad steps leading to heavy bronze doors. On this October morning, those doors opened to admit a procession of dark SUVs carrying federal agents and their high-profile prisoners, Vikram Mehta and Lakshmi Mehta, the architects of what prosecutors were already describing as one of the most elaborate insurance fraud schemes in recent memory. Inside courtroom 4B, Audrey Blackwell sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by agents Walsh and Carrera. The weeks following the arrests had been a whirlwind of depositions, evidence reviews, and meetings with prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Today marked the first major hearing in the case, the arraignment where charges would be formally presented and pleas entered. When the side door opened and marshals led the defendants in, Audrey's breath caught. This would be her first direct confrontation with Vikram since discovering he was alive. He entered the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, hands and feet shackled, looking thinner than she remembered from the surveillance photos. Behind him came Lakshmi, similarly restrained, her normally elegant appearance diminished by detention center attire and the absence of jewelry and makeup. As Vikram took his seat at the defense table, his eyes scanned the gallery, inevitably finding Audrey. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, the first acknowledgement between them since that fateful night in Chicago. His expression remained unreadable, a mask of composure that revealed nothing of his thoughts at seeing the wife who had believed him dead for 8 years. Audrey had prepared herself for this moment, rehearsing it mentally for days. She had imagined feeling rage, vindication, even satisfaction at seeing him reduced to prisoner status. What she hadn't anticipated was the hollow emptiness that actually filled her, the sense that the man before her was a stranger wearing familiar features. The proceedings began with formal introductions. The prosecution team, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Eleanor Chen, presented an impressive array of charges: conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud, making false statements to financial institutions, identity theft, money laundering, tax evasion, and false statements to federal officers. If convicted on all counts, each defendant faced potentially decades in federal prison. Vikram had retained Martin Goldstein, a prominent defense attorney known for handling complex white-collar cases. Lakshmi was represented separately by Simon Jeffries, a specialist in international financial crimes. The dual representation immediately signaled a potential defense strategy. Each defendant might attempt to minimize their own role by implicating the other. "How do the defendants plead?" Judge Raymond Townsend asked after the charges had been read. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Goldstein answered for Vikram. "Not guilty," echoed Jeffries for Lakshmi. The pleas were expected. Standard procedure even in cases with overwhelming evidence. What followed, however, was more contentious: the detention hearing to determine whether the defendants would remain in custody pending trial. AUSHN argued forcefully for continued detention. "Both defendants present extraordinary flight risks, Your Honor. They have demonstrated sophisticated capabilities in creating false identities, have access to substantial financial resources overseas, and have extensive international connections. Moreover, they were literally caught attempting to flee the country." Goldstein countered with an offer of house arrest, electronic monitoring, and a substantial bond secured by the Shaker Heights property. "My client has established roots in this country. He has a professional career, community ties." "Your Honor," Chen interrupted, "the defendant's entire existence in this country has been predicated on fraud. His professional career was established using false credentials. His community ties were formed under an assumed identity. These are not mitigating factors. They are additional evidence of the elaborate deception he has perpetrated." Judge Townsend appeared to consider the arguments carefully before rendering his decision. "The defendants will remain in custody pending trial. The risk of flight is simply too great, given the resources potentially available to them and their demonstrated willingness to create and maintain false identities." As the defendants were led from the courtroom, Vikram turned slightly, his eyes once again finding Audrey. This time something flickered across his features, a hint of emotion quickly suppressed, gone before she could interpret its meaning. Outside the courthouse, Agent Carrera briefed Audrey on next steps. "The investigation is expanding internationally. We're coordinating with Indian authorities regarding the circumstances of the staged accident and the unidentified victim. The financial trail is being traced through multiple jurisdictions: Cayman Islands, Singapore, Dubai." "How long until trial?" Audrey asked, watching as the transport vehicles carrying Vikram and Lakshmi departed for the detention center. "These complex financial cases can take months to prepare," Carrera admitted. "There will be pre-trial motions, discovery challenges, possibly even interlocutory appeals. The defense will try to exclude certain evidence, challenge the jurisdiction for some charges." "They're going to drag this out," Audrey concluded. "They'll try," Agent Walsh confirmed, "but they're also facing mounting evidence. Just yesterday, our technical team cracked the encryption on Vikram's laptop. We found communications with contacts in Mumbai that clearly implicate both defendants in planning the accident. There are explicit discussions about finding a suitable replacement, presumably referring to the unidentified victim." This information sent a chill through Audrey. The possibility that had haunted her, that Vikram might have been directly involved in an innocent person's death, seemed increasingly likely with each new discovery. The weeks following the arraignment brought a steady stream of revelations as the FBI's investigation deepened. Working with Interpol and Indian police, agents identified the likely victim of the Mumbai accident as Pratik Sharma, no relation to Vikram's false identity, a homeless man who had frequented the area near the Mehta textile factory. Witnesses reported seeing him speaking with a woman matching Lakshmi's description days before the accident. The most damning evidence came from recovered emails between Vikram and Lakshmi, written in coded language, but clearly discussing the logistics of the staged death. In one exchange dated 3 months before the accident, Vikram had written, "The insurance matter is arranged. Policy increased as discussed. Timeline accelerated due to developments with the tax authorities. Need to finalize exit strategy before quarter's end." Lakshmi's response had been equally incriminating. Transportation item secured, replacement identified. Will handle documentation personally to ensure no connections remain. As investigators pieced together the full conspiracy, a timeline emerged that shocked even experienced fraud investigators. The plot had begun more than 2 years before Vikram's staged death, coinciding with the beginning of an investigation into the Mehta textile business by Indian tax authorities. Deepak Mehta's death in 2013 had not been part of the original plan, but had accelerated the timeline when Vikram and Lakshmi realized they could use it to their advantage. They had kept Deepak's death relatively quiet, with only a small private ceremony rather than the public funeral expected for a businessman of his standing. This had allowed them to maintain the fiction that he was still alive but ill, giving them time to extract assets from the company before creditors or authorities could make claims. The staged accident in Mumbai had been meticulously planned. Vikram had actually traveled to India, then discreetly returned to the United States using the first of his false identities, Daniel Barrett, a Canadian businessman. Meanwhile, Lakshmi had arranged for Pratik Sharma to be given alcohol laced with sedatives. The intoxicated man had been placed in Vikram's rented car, which was then deliberately crashed and set ablaze on the Mumbai-Pune expressway. Vikram's passport, wallet, and other identifying items had been planted in the vehicle to ensure the body would be identified as his. The severity of the burns had made conventional identification impossible, and in 2015, DNA testing was not standard procedure for accident victims in that region of India, particularly when other identification seemed conclusive. After the accident, Vikram had lived quietly as Daniel Barrett in Toronto for nearly 2 years, maintaining minimal contact with Lakshmi, while she handled the insurance claim and other financial matters in the United States. Once the insurance payment had been made and sufficient time had passed, he had established his more permanent identity as Raj Sharma and relocated to Cleveland, where Lakshmi eventually joined him, ostensibly as his mother. The financial aspects of the scheme were equally complex. The life insurance payout had been only a small part of the overall plan. Much larger sums, millions of dollars, had been siphoned from the Mehta textile business through a network of shell companies in Dubai, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands. These funds had eventually made their way to accounts controlled by Raj Sharma, providing the capital for his luxurious lifestyle and seemingly successful investment career. As these details emerged, prosecutors added new charges to the already substantial case. What had begun as fraud and identity theft now included conspiracy to commit homicide, though proving their direct responsibility for Pratik Sharma's death would be challenging given the passage of time and jurisdictional issues. 3 months after the arrests, as the case moved slowly through pre-trial procedures, a new development added another dimension to the investigation. A detailed analysis of Vikram's financial activities revealed multiple large transfers to an account in Switzerland held by a senior official in the Mumbai Police Department, the same official who had overseen the investigation of the accident that had supposedly killed Vikram. He had help from the inside, Agent Carrera explained to Audrey during one of their regular case updates. This officer ensured that the accident investigation remained superficial, that no one looked too closely at the identification of the body. The officer in question had since retired and relocated to Australia, but Interpol agents were tracking him down for questioning. The web of conspiracy was expanding, revealing corruption that crossed international boundaries. Throughout these developments, Audrey remained actively engaged with the investigation, reviewing evidence and providing insights into Vikram's habits, connections, and personal history. Her medical training proved unexpectedly valuable when analyzing the records related to Pratik Sharma's injuries, helping investigators understand how the deception had been executed. 6 months after the arrests, with trial still several months away, prosecutors approached Audrey with news that would dramatically alter the case trajectory. Lakshmi Mehta wants to make a deal, AUSAN informed her, during a private meeting in the U.S. Attorney's Office. She's offering to testify against Vikram in exchange for reduced charges. The possibility had always existed that one conspirator would turn against the other, but the specifics of Lakshmi's offer were surprising. She claims the entire scheme was Vikram's idea, Chen continued. According to her statement, she was coerced into participating through threats related to her financial security after Deepak's death. Audrey received this information skeptically. That contradicts everything we've learned about their relationship. The evidence suggests they were equal partners. Agreed, Chen nodded, but she's offering something significant, access to additional accounts we haven't yet identified. Apparently, Vikram maintained a separate financial reserve even Lakshmi wasn't supposed to know about. She discovered it accidentally and kept that knowledge as her own insurance policy. The accounts allegedly contained over $10 million in assets that could potentially be recovered and used for restitution. This prospect made Lakshmi's offer at least worth considering, though prosecutors remained wary of her attempt to minimize her own culpability. "What do you think we should do?" Chen asked, valuing Audrey's perspective as the most personally affected victim. After careful consideration, Audrey offered her view. If her testimony strengthens the case against Vikram, particularly regarding Pratik Sharma's death, it might be worth it. But any deal should include full restitution and significant prison time. This wasn't just about money. A man died, and they used his body to facilitate their escape. The prosecution ultimately negotiated a limited cooperation agreement with Lakshmi. In exchange for her testimony and information about hidden assets, they would recommend a sentence of 12 years rather than the potential 30-plus years she faced if convicted on all counts. The deal explicitly required her to provide complete and truthful testimony about all aspects of the conspiracy, including the circumstances of Pratik Sharma's death. With Lakshmi's cooperation secured, the case against Vikram strengthened considerably. His defense team, recognizing the shifting dynamics, approached prosecutors about the possibility of a plea arrangement, but Vikram refused to consider any deal that included acknowledging responsibility for Pratik Sharma's death. His attorneys argued that the accident had been arranged by Lakshmi without his knowledge of the specific methods she would use. As the investigation continued expanding internationally, new evidence emerged almost weekly. Bank records from Singapore revealed that Vikram had visited the country 3 times in the year before his staged death, establishing accounts and business relationships that would later support his new identity. Email records recovered from encrypted servers showed extensive planning between the conspirators, directly contradicting Lakshmi's claim of coercion. Most damning was the recovery of a digital journal Vikram had maintained on a heavily encrypted hard drive found in the Cleveland storage unit. The journal detailed the evolution of the scheme from its inception as a way to protect assets from the Indian tax investigation to its final execution as an elaborate death fraud. Entries specifically discussed the selection of Pratik Sharma as the suitable replacement, noting his similar physical build and the fact that he had no family who would report him missing or question his death. 9 months after the arrests, as the trial date approached, the defense strategy shifted. Vikram's attorneys filed a motion challenging the admissibility of evidence obtained from the storage unit, claiming Fourth Amendment violations in the search warrant process. This legal maneuver threatened to exclude some of the most incriminating evidence, particularly the digital journal that explicitly linked Vikram to Pratik Sharma's death. The motion hearing stretched over 3 days of technical legal arguments. Judge Townsend considered the matter carefully before issuing his ruling. While certain peripheral documents were excluded due to technical issues with the warrant language, the core evidence, including the digital journal, remained admissible. This ruling effectively collapsed Vikram's defense strategy. Without the possibility of excluding the most damning evidence and facing the prospect of Lakshmi's testimony against him, his position became increasingly untenable. 2 weeks before the scheduled trial date, his attorneys approached the prosecution with a new proposal. He's willing to plead guilty to all financial charges and accept a 20-year sentence, AUSA Chen informed Audrey, but he continues to deny direct knowledge of or responsibility for Pratik Sharma's death. He claims Lakshmi handled that aspect independently. The offer presented prosecutors with a difficult decision. Accepting it would guarantee a substantial sentence for the financial crimes while avoiding the risks and costs of a complex international trial. Rejecting it meant proceeding to trial with the additional burden of proving Vikram's direct involvement in Pratik's death, a charge that, despite the strong circumstantial evidence, still faced jurisdictional and evidentiary challenges. "What do you want us to do?" Chen asked Audrey, acknowledging her unique stake in the outcome. After a long silence, Audrey provided her answer, one that reflected not vengeance but a determination to see justice fully served. "We need to know the truth about what happened to Pratik Sharma. If that means going to trial, then that's what we should do. He deserves justice as much as I do, more actually. I lost 8 years to grief for a man who never died. Pratik lost his life, The decision was made. The prosecution would proceed to trial on all charges, seeking to hold Vikram fully accountable not just for the financial fraud, but for his role in the death that had facilitated it. As the final pre-trial conference concluded, Audrey found herself face-to-face with Vikram in the courthouse corridor. Surrounded by marshals preparing to return him to the detention center, he paused, looking directly at her for the first time since their brief eye contact at the arraignment months earlier. "Audrey," he said simply, his voice carrying the familiar accent she had once loved. She met his gaze steadily, searching for any trace of the man she had believed him to be. Finding none, she responded with the only question that still mattered to her. Was any of it real? For a moment, something like regret crossed his features. Then the mask returned, and without answering, he allowed the marshals to lead him away. As Audrey watched him disappear through the security door, she realized the answer didn't matter anymore. Whether Vikram had ever truly loved her was irrelevant to the person she had become, a woman who had survived grief, betrayal, and the collapse of everything she had believed about her marriage. The truth that mattered now was not about the past they had shared, but about justice for all the victims of his elaborate deception. The trial would begin in 2 weeks, and Audrey Blackwell would be there, not just as a witness to fraud, but as an advocate for truth in all its complex and painful dimensions. The trial of Vikram Mehta began on a Monday morning in early July, almost 10 months after Audrey's chance encounter in the Chicago restaurant. The federal courthouse in Detroit had been prepared for the media attention the case had attracted, with additional security personnel and designated areas for press. International news organizations had sent representatives, particularly from India, where the case had become a sensation due to its connections to prominent Mumbai business circles. Courtroom 7A, the largest in the building, was filled to capacity as AUSA Eleanor Chen rose to deliver her opening statement. Behind her, a large digital screen displayed a photograph of Vikram and Audrey on their wedding day, a poignant reminder of where the deception had begun. "This case," Chen began, her voice measured but forceful, "is about betrayal on an extraordinary scale. The defendant, Vikram Mehta, didn't just commit fraud. He faked his own death, abandoned his wife to years of grief, potentially caused the death of an innocent homeless man, and then built an entirely new life using the proceeds of his crimes." Over the next hour, she methodically outlined the prosecution's case, presenting a timeline that stretched from the initial investigation into the Mehta textile business in India to Vikram's arrest at the Canadian border. The evidence, she promised the jury, would reveal a conspiracy of staggering complexity and callousness. "You will hear testimony," she continued, "from financial experts who tracked millions of dollars through a labyrinth of offshore accounts. You will hear from law enforcement officers who discovered multiple false identities meticulously crafted over years. You will hear from witnesses who placed the defendant in locations he was never supposed to be, alive and well, during years when his wife believed him dead." Her voice softened slightly as she gestured toward Audrey, seated in the front row of the gallery. "And you will hear from Audrey Blackwell, who lived through 8 years of unnecessary grief, who built a memorial scholarship in her husband's name, who struggled to move forward with her life, all while he was living in luxury less than 200 miles away." When Martin Goldstein rose for the defense's opening statement, his approach was notably different. Rather than contesting the core facts, he focused on motivations and context. "My client does not deny the financial transactions outlined by the prosecution," he acknowledged, surprising many observers who had expected a more combative defense. "But the context of these actions is crucial to understanding them. Vikram Mehta found himself caught between legal systems, facing potential persecution in India for his father's business practices in which he had no direct involvement. This strategy, portraying Vikram as a victim of circumstances rather than the architect of deception, set the tone for the defense's case. They would concede the financial fraud while vigorously contesting the more serious charges related to Pratik Sharma's death. Over the following days, the prosecution presented a parade of witnesses who established the timeline and mechanics of the fraud. FBI financial analysts detailed the movement of funds from India through multiple jurisdictions before reaching accounts controlled by Raj Sharma. Document examiners testified about the sophisticated forgeries used to create Vikram's various identities. Digital forensics experts explained how they had recovered deleted files and encrypted communications, revealing the extensive planning behind the scheme. On the 4th day of trial, Lakshmi Mehta took the stand as the prosecution's key cooperating witness. Dressed in prison attire, her once elegant appearance diminished by months in detention, she avoided looking at Vikram as she was sworn in. Under Chen's careful questioning, Lakshmi described the genesis of the conspiracy following the initiation of the tax investigation in India. Deepak, my husband, had been operating in a grey area for years, she testified. When the authorities began looking more closely at the company, Vikram realized we could all face criminal charges. His position as a US resident made him particularly vulnerable to international financial charges. According to her testimony, the initial plan had been simply to move assets offshore before they could be frozen. But when Deepak died unexpectedly in 2013, Vikram saw an opportunity for a more comprehensive solution. He said, "What if we both disappeared?" Lakshmi recalled. "What if we created new lives somewhere else, free from all these legal entanglements?" The most damning portion of her testimony concerned Pratik Sharma. "Vikram said we needed a body," she stated, her voice dropping almost to a whisper, "someone who wouldn't be missed." He identified this homeless man who sometimes slept near the factory, said he was the right size, right general appearance. She described in clinical detail how they had given Pratik alcohol laced with sedatives, placed him in Vikram's rented car, staged the crash and then ensured the vehicle caught fire. Vikram said it had to burn completely, she testified, so there would be no way to identify the body except through the documents we left. During cross-examination, Goldstein attacked Lakshmi's credibility, highlighting inconsistencies in her previous statements and emphasizing the benefits she received from her cooperation agreement. "Isn't it true," he pressed, "that you were the one who actually handled all arrangements in India, that my client was already back in the United States when the accident occurred?" "He planned everything," Lakshmi insisted. "He gave me precise instructions for how it should be done. But he wasn't physically present," Goldstein persisted. "You have no direct evidence of his involvement beyond your word, the word of a confessed criminal seeking a reduced sentence." Despite the defense's efforts to undermine her testimony, Lakshmi remained largely consistent in her account of Vikram's central role in planning and directing all aspects of the conspiracy, including Pratik's death. On the 6th day of trial, Audrey Blackwell took the witness stand. The courtroom fell silent as she was sworn in, all eyes moving between her and Vikram, who maintained the impassive expression he had worn throughout the proceedings. Audrey testified about their marriage, Vikram's increasing travel to India in the months before his death, and the devastating impact of learning he had died in a fiery crash. Her account of the 8 years that followed, the grief, the gradual rebuilding of her life, the scholarship fund established in his memory, provided a powerful emotional dimension to the case. "When did you first realize your husband might still be alive?" Chen asked. Audrey described the night in Chicago when she had spotted Vikram dining with Lakshmi. "At first I thought I was hallucinating," she admitted. "It seemed impossible. But then he looked in my direction and I saw recognition in his eyes before he quickly looked away. That's when I knew." The most challenging moment came when Chen asked about her feelings upon confirming Vikram was alive. "I felt," Audrey paused, searching for the right words. "I felt like I'd been mourning a stranger, the man I had loved, the man I thought I had married. He never existed. The real Vikram Mehta was capable of watching me suffer for 8 years while he lived a comfortable life just a few hours away." During cross-examination, Goldstein tried to suggest that Vikram's actions might have been motivated by concern for Audrey's welfare. "Isn't it possible," he proposed, "that my client believed separating you from his legal troubles was actually protecting you?" Audrey's response was measured but firm. "If that were true, he could have divorced me or simply told me he needed to leave. Letting me believe he was dead for 8 years wasn't protection. It was cruelty." As the trial progressed into its second week, the prosecution presented evidence specifically linking Vikram to the planning of Pratik Sharma's death. Digital forensics experts testified about recovered files from Vikram's encrypted drives, including the journal entries that explicitly discussed finding a suitable replacement and ensuring the fire would be sufficient to prevent identification. The most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source, a former employee of the Mehta textile factory, who testified that he had observed Vikram speaking to Pratik Sharma several times in the weeks before the accident, offering him food and small amounts of money. This contradicted Vikram's claim, maintained through his attorneys, that he had no direct knowledge of or interaction with the man who would die in his place. When the prosecution rested its case on the 9th day of trial, legal observers noted the overwhelming strength of the evidence presented. The defense case, by contrast, was notably brief. Character witnesses testified about Raj Sharma's contributions to Cleveland community organizations. Financial experts suggested alternate interpretations of some transactions, attempting to minimize Vikram's direct involvement in the most egregious aspects of the fraud. Vikram himself never took the stand, a decision that surprised some observers, but reflected his attorney's assessment that cross-examination would likely be devastating to their already weakened position. After 12 days of testimony, the case went to the jury following closing arguments that summarized the starkly different narratives presented by each side. The prosecution portrayed Vikram as the calculating mastermind of an elaborate scheme that had caused financial, emotional, and physical harm. The defense continued to emphasize contextual factors and attempted to shift responsibility for the most serious aspects of the conspiracy to Lakshmi. The jury deliberated for just over 14 hours before reaching their verdict. As Judge Townsend instructed Vikram to rise, the courtroom fell completely silent. On the count of conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud, how do you find? Guilty, the jury forewoman announced. Similar verdicts followed for the financial charges, the identity theft counts, and the tax evasion specifications. When it came to the final and most serious charge, conspiracy to commit homicide in the death of Pratik Sharma, the forewoman's voice remained firm. Guilty. Vikram showed no visible reaction to the verdicts, maintaining the same composed demeanor he had displayed throughout the trial. Behind him in the gallery, Audrey closed her eyes briefly, a complex mix of emotions crossing her features. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later, during which time the probation department would prepare a pre-sentence report, and both sides would submit sentencing memoranda. Throughout this period, Audrey worked closely with the prosecution team, providing a victim impact statement that would be considered by Judge Townsend in determining the appropriate punishment. On a warm August morning, Audrey returned to courtroom 7A for the sentencing. The media presence had diminished somewhat since the verdict, but the case still commanded significant attention, particularly the question of how severely Vikram would be punished for his elaborate deception. After hearing arguments from both sides and acknowledging the sentencing guidelines applicable to the various convictions, Judge Townsend addressed Vikram directly. Mr. Feta, you have been convicted of extraordinary crimes that combined financial fraud with profound personal betrayal and, most seriously, contribution to the death of another human being, he stated. The calculating nature of these offenses, the years spent maintaining this deception, and the callous disregard for the emotional suffering of your wife and the physical harm to Pratik Sharma place your actions among the most disturbing this court has encountered. Vikram was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for the combined charges, with the recommendation that he serve his time at a medium security facility in Michigan. Following his eventual release, he would face deportation to India, where authorities had indicated their intention to pursue additional charges related to the business fraud and Pratik's death. Lakshmi, in accordance with her cooperation agreement, received a 12-year sentence. Both defendants were ordered to make restitution of approximately $14 million, representing the life insurance payout, diverted business assets, and punitive damages. As marshals prepared to lead Vikram from the courtroom following the sentencing, he turned slightly, his eyes finding Audrey in the gallery. For the first time since his arrest, his carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing a fleeting glimpse of what might have been regret before he was escorted through the side door. Outside the courthouse, standing on the broad steps in the summer sunshine, Audrey faced a cluster of reporters seeking her reaction to the sentence. Justice was served today, she stated simply. Not just for me, but for Pratik Sharma, whose life was valued so little in this scheme. No sentence can return the 8 years I lost to grief or give Pratik back his life, but accountability matters. Truth matters. When asked about her plans moving forward, Audrey revealed that she had resigned from her position at Henry Ford Hospital and would be relocating to Seattle, where she had accepted a position with a medical research foundation focusing on trauma recovery. This experience has changed me, she acknowledged. I want to use what I've learned, both as a medical professional and as someone who has lived through this kind of trauma, to help others rebuild their lives after profound loss and betrayal. In the months following the sentencing, Audrey worked with prosecutors to ensure that a portion of the recovered funds would be used to establish a proper memorial for Pratik Sharma in Mumbai. Though he had died without family to mourn him, the foundation created in his name would provide housing and medical care for homeless individuals in the city where his life had been so callously ended. The legal aftermath of the case continued long after Audrey had relocated to Seattle. International investigations into the broader conspiracy resulted in charges against several officials in Mumbai who had facilitated various aspects of the fraud, including the police officer who had conducted the superficial investigation of the fatal accident. Additional financial investigations uncovered even more assets hidden by Vikram and Lakshmi, including property in Dubai and investment accounts in Switzerland. These discoveries increased the total amount available for restitution and allowed for the expansion of both the scholarship fund Audrey had established in her grief and the new foundation honoring Pratik Sharma. 1 year after the sentencing, Audrey returned to Detroit for the dedication of a memorial garden at Wayne State University, funded by recovered assets from the fraud. The garden included a small plaque acknowledging both the scholarship fund's origin and its connection to the case that had made international headlines. As she stood by the plaque after the dedication ceremony, a reporter who had covered the trial approached her with a final question. "Do you ever visit him in prison?" Audrey shook her head. "There's nothing left to say. The man I thought I married never existed. The real Vikram Mehta is a stranger to me." In Seattle, Audrey gradually built a new life that incorporated the wisdom gained from her extraordinary experience. Her work with the Medical Research Foundation specialized in developing protocols for treating complex grief and trauma, particularly cases involving deception and betrayal. The methodologies she helped develop would eventually be adopted by treatment centers nationwide. 3 years after relocating, she met Daniel Brennan, a neurologist whose wife had died of cancer 2 years earlier. Their shared experience of genuine grief created a foundation of understanding that slowly blossomed into a relationship based on complete transparency and mutual respect. On a rainy spring morning 5 years after the trial, Audrey stood at the window of her Seattle apartment, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. In her hand was a letter that had arrived that morning from the Federal Bureau of Prisons, notifying her that Vikram had been transferred to a facility in Atlanta in preparation for eventual deportation to India. She placed the unopened letter in a drawer, turning away from the past it represented. On her desk lay the outline for a book she had begun writing, not about Vikram's deception specifically, but about the broader themes of recovery and rebuilding after profound betrayal. The working title was After the Ghost, Reclaiming Your Life When the Past Was a Lie. Outside, the rain had stopped, sunlight beginning to break through clouds over Puget Sound. Audrey gathered her notes and laptop, preparing to meet Daniel for lunch before an afternoon presentation at the foundation. The ghost that had haunted her for so many years had finally been exorcised, not through vengeance but through the patient work of rebuilding a life based on truth rather than illusion. The extraordinary saga of Vikram Mehta's deception had become, in the end, just one chapter in Audrey Blackwell's ongoing story, a painful passage that had ultimately led her to greater wisdom, deeper compassion, and a life authentically her own. As she stepped outside into the clearing day, Audrey reflected that some questions would always remain unanswered. Had any part of their marriage been real? Had Vikram ever truly loved her? But these questions no longer haunted her. The truth that mattered was not about the past, but about the present she had created and the future she continued to build. One day, one choice, one act of courage at a time. In courtrooms and news headlines, the case would long be remembered as an extraordinary fraud, a scheme of remarkable complexity and duration. But for Audrey, it had become something else entirely, a testament to the human capacity for resilience, for truth-seeking, and ultimately for renewal after even the most profound betrayal. The woman who had once been defined as a widow, grieving a man who had never died, had reclaimed her story on her own terms. And in that reclamation lay the most meaningful justice of all,